So my talk is what can't Chat GPT say? Language resistance and the strange powers we're forgetting. My name is Erin Glass. I work now in my fourth career or whatever. I work in open source cybersecurity. But I spent about a decade in higher education advocating for student governed ed tech. And I also happen to have a PhD in literature. So that didn't work. Those are my qualifications. Like many, like all of us, I'm concerned about AI's impact on multiple dimensions of life. And as someone whose first passion was literature, I've become particularly interested in the implications of AI on our language usage. And so it seems to me that the more we rely on machines to generate our words, the more we risk forgetting what language is truly capable of. And I thought we could start with the M dash, right? Because people are talking about the M dash online. Like it's a hot, spicy topic. The M dash and right, and a whole basket full of other alleged giveaways of AI generated text, right? And so the idea is that there are certain textual markers that reveal whether you used a tool like ChatGPT to write something. And so you'll hear folks saying, like, for the love of God, at least edit out the M dashes so it isn't obvious that you used AI. But you'll also hear folks saying, like, look, I've been using M dashes since I was 5 years old and more correctly than all of you. And the AI probably trained on my own writing. So stop saying I sound like a bot. And I love these debates. I think they're really fun. They're really interesting. But I actually don't think they're just about M dashes or even authenticity of writing. I think they're stand-ins for a deeper concern and one that we're still trying to figure out how to name. It's a concern that something sacred about language is at risk. So today I want to try to, advance our understanding of what this mysterious, sacred, threatened dimension of language might be. To be clear, it's not an anti-AI talk. I find, just practically speaking, AI can be useful in certain cases. I just think it should be under community control, community governance, user governance, so that we can have more agency over all the broader ethical problems that this conference highlights, such as student surveillance, like Ian has highlighted for us. Um, what I'm going to be focusing on in this talk is what I think are underrepresented dimensions of language that are more often discussed by philosophers and poets, but that I think are really deeply relevant to us all, and I think we sense them. So there's a quote by the poet Adrienne Rich that I've always loved. She says, "You must write and read as if your life depended on it." You must write and read as if your life depended on it. What kind of reading and writing is she talking about? Like, what kind of reading and writing could be so important, that your actual life could depend on it? That's the kind of reading and writing I want to try to investigate today. And so what I've come up with is three powers. There are at least three powers of language that are sidelined by AI writing tools, but that I think enrich our living in this really important way. They are powers that we need to live full empowered lives. And these powers are pleasure, perception, and transformation. So let's talk about what these are, why they're important, and how we might make sure that we keep them in our practice. So I wanted to start with a tongue twister. I don't know if you could see this, but say it out loud with me if you can. Um, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? Um, that was a fun one to bring back. I don't know when the last time you've heard that, but if you did get to say it out loud, how did that feel? Right? You don't need to know what a peck is or what that thing is even talking about to enjoy it, right? The point is entertainment, it's pleasure, it's the feel of the words in your mouth, it's the cognitive and physical delight of the rhyme, rather than just like the transaction of information. So it draws us in for reasons aside from its semantic meaning. And this is what I am calling language as pleasure. And of course, in many spheres of our life, we completely filter out this mode of using language because it's unprofessional, it's too silly, it's too personal, it's inefficient, et cetera. We prioritize the use of language as a tool conveying information because we live in an information society. That is the most dominant use of our of language in public settings. But the personal, the playful, the pleasurable, right? Those uses of language, we almost see them as childlike, right? And lo and behold, where does this form of language actually maybe live the most? And I think it's in children's books. So can anyone guess which book this is? In the Great Green Room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of a cow jumping over the moon. Anyone remember what that is? That's from Goodnight Moon, right? And this is language that delights in like a really quiet way. It sets a mood, it sets a vibe, a sort of soothing peacefulness that it has nothing to do with red balloons or cows jumping over the moon, but there's something there. There's something that can move us if we attend to it. Poetry too, of course, but like who reads poetry these days? Poetry is obsessed with leveraging the non-semantic capacities of language to draw listeners in, right? Poets, they love sound, they love rhythm, they love unexpected metaphors, they love just like messing with your brain, right? Think of the famous opening lines of T.S. Eliot's poem, "Let us go then, you and I, with the evening spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table." I mean, I so encourage you to go to that poem, go to any poem and just read it out loud. Don't scan it, just say it with your breath and feel it kind of moving through your body. It's an extraordinary experience. Um, Protest too, right? That's another space where we really see this pleasurable dimension of language, particularly in terms of using sound and rhythm for energizing and unifying a crowd, right? If you've walked in a protest and chanted, you've probably experienced that like overwhelming feeling of merging with collective energy, and it can be quite moving. Just off the top of my head, like whose streets? Our streets, right? I mean, there's a beat, there's a rhythm in it, and it calls to you. Speeches too, although I think this was more mid-century and before than today, but right, Martin Luther King's famous lines, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed." He's transmitting information, sure, but he's also using a literary cadence and metaphorical language and a whole other set of, literary tools to inspire and energize the listeners. Online too, right? Look at your text messages. Look on internet forums. Like someone is probably yelling "Yes, Queen," or smashing the keyboard or spelling words in ridiculous ways. And there's a delight there too. And so I could go on, of course, but the point is that all of these examples are using language in ways that go, beyond information transfer. And they do this by using some sort of combination of breath, rhythm, metaphor, illusion, unexpected mixing of ideas, rhyme, and just like the sheer sound of words to draw us in at this deeper level. And this is a well-recognized phenomenon, right? That language can create bodily and cognitive pleasure. The literary critic Roland Barthes, for example, he called this the cognitive form of literary pleasure, jouissance, right? It's a deep ecstatic pleasure that comes from a text's disruptive and unsettling qualities. Like for him, meaning was most alive when it resisted closure, when it resisted interpretation, when it just sort of left your brain tingling and going, what? Um, but what I think is really interesting is like neuroscience now is starting to pick up on this, and it's also is starting to see that language can cause physical pleasure and cognitive pleasure. There are studies that show poetry lights up areas of the brain associated with food or romantic love, especially when, say it's a poem, it has something unsettling, like Barthes was saying, something that doesn't quite make sense. Um, and then in terms of the physical delight, neuroscience has shown that people will get shivers when listening to poetry, even if they don't really like poetry. I mean, I think that's so fascinating. But it also goes both ways. There are studies that show that when we are revealing something personal, we often fall into iambic pentameter, and we don't even know that we're doing that. So the pleasurable dimension of language is something that we are really wired to respond to, whether we are aware of it or not. So, why should we care? Why am I, talking about this right now? Um, I am bringing in this up because I think this dimension of language is profoundly nourishing. It's restorative. It's soothing. I think it can bring people together. I think it can help us overcome individual and collective forms of despair that nothing else can. And we're at a moment we really need those resources. We need all the resources we can get. So what I worry about is that the more we shift to using AI for writing, which prioritizes speed, disembodiment, abstraction, the less attention and incentive we have for producing and receiving this form of language that requires us to slow down and embody it in order to really experience it. So, just a reminder, we all have this really awesome power at our disposal. It's free. I think we should exercise it like we go to the gym to exercise. Read a poem out loud with breath, say something ridiculous in a work report, play with the sound of words, whenever you can, and, see how it feels, see how it affects other people. But let's move on. Language as perception. The cognitive scientist Lara Boroditsky says language shapes our cognitive universe. I love that. Language shapes, our understanding of what we believe is true, and in ways we don't even really recognize. But the evidence for this is really, really interesting. Russian, for example, has multiple distinct words for shades of blue. And because of this, Russian speakers actually perceive those blues more quickly than English speakers. Another example, in the Aboriginal language called Gugu Yimithir, I'm probably butchering that name, there is no left or right. Everything is expressed in terms of cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. And these speakers apparently always know where these directions are. You put them in a dark, unfamiliar room, and they can tell you where north is. And I just wonder, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would pass that test myself. Um, Most fascinating to me is there are studies that suggest that grammar, just our grammar, can influence our behavior. There was a study that showed that languages um, whose future tense is more similar to the present, like in Mandarin or German. In those languages, speakers are more likely to save money, exercise regularly, avoid smoking, just like make all the good decisions, compared to speakers in languages that have a very distinct future tense, like English, right? And so the thought is that if the future seems less far away, from you, you are going to make better decisions because you can kind of identify with that future self more closely. So that explains all of my bad decisions as a English speaker. Um, of course, right? Language doesn't shape what we see, it shapes how we are seen. I certainly don't need to explain that to this group, but the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, for example, right? He describes language as a type of market. And when we speak, we're not just transmitting information, we're trading in symbolic power. Some speakers are seen as educated and serious, and others as emotional or unintelligent, just based on how they use language. So here, grammar and all the rules of language aren't really about being correct. It's about guarding hierarchy. Excuse me. Relatedly, Frantz Fanon, he wrote about how the colonized need to speak the colonizer's language in order to participate in society. But in doing so, they absorb the colonizer's values. And when this happens, they're actually alienating themselves from their cultural origins. They're eroding their own self-worth because they're seeing themselves from the colonizer's gaze. And so while he was talking about psychological and cultural violence of colonial domination, I think it's interesting to consider how Silicon Valley's terminology has had a huge influence on how we talk about ourselves, our goals, and our values as people, right? There's like words like optimize and scale and disrupt and content and brand are now a part of everyday language. So the language we move through every day carries, embedded judgments, cultural histories, inherited values, modes of seeing that shape our understanding of the world in ways that we might not always be aware of. And there's research that shows that even our neural architecture can be changed when someone is exposed, to a different kind of language intensely over a period of time, such as, reading a novel over the course of the week, and that those neural changes actually last for about 5 days after you've finished a novel. I think that is fascinating. I'm not suggesting, right, that there is a neutral language. There certainly isn't, but we should be wary of becoming locked into language. And we should seek out different language environments so we can build more flexible cognitive universes, a cognitive universe that allows us to see from multiple perspectives, to question our assumptions and literally light up all these, tired, atrophied parts of our brain. So I worry that the use or the overuse of LLMs for writing threatens our linguistic diversity, even just within, the English language, because they can give the illusion of encompassing a vast diversity of voices. But right, mathematically, if you know how these large language models work, that diversity is smoothed into a kind of statistical average. And, I was trying to think about like a metaphor here. Imagine if J.K. Rowling was the author of every single text in the history of humankind. And even if she tried to imitate each original style, right, the raw texture, the rhythm, the emotional grain, the textual imprint of the author's unique lived experience would be completely lost in translation. And sometimes it's that's actually more important than the literal semantic meaning. Um, and like all language sets, right? An LLM, a large language model, represents a particular ideological view of the world. In this case, I think it's a cognitive universe optimized for clarity and productivity and user satisfaction, right? It reflects the Silicon Valley norms while giving this illusion of infinite access to diverse knowledge sources. So for perception, I just want to suggest that we really, remember the value of primary sources of individual voices of texts from completely other places and times as a way to prevent, a flattening of our minds. Okay, last section, folks. We're going to talk about language as a transformative force. So, good news, right? Language is also a transformative force. It can change all this. Words can fight words. We're going to be okay. Um, that was what I was hoping to tell you in part three, but instead, I think I have to tell you a story. So, there I was trying to write part three, like 30 hours ago. And, I was trying to proclaim that language could change the world. It could turn water into wine. It's awesome. And I just couldn't do it. I was just typing and backspacing for days and it made no sense. And this was the whole reason I signed up for the talk, right? This is the thing I was most excited to talk about because when I was an academic, I was just obsessed with reading about how language could, do such a thing. There are so many beautiful thinkers on this topic. Just to name a few, like Paulo Freire, the oppressed live in a culture of silence, and they have no language to help them grasp the problems of the world. So through dialogue, they can name their problems, and that will enable them to transform them, right? Or Donna Haraway, we need new stories, we need new language to challenge restrictive inherited categories, to help us think about our problems in new ways and disrupt binaries and open up new thought and enable new collectivities. Adrienne Rich, poetry can break open locked chambers of possibility, restore numb zones to feeling, recharge desire. Helen Sissot, right from the body, right against the language that attempts to blind you from your very self. And so many notes from over the years, and but none of it was feeling real. 34 hours ago, I'm tired, like probably like you. I've got a full-time job, I've got kids, and oh my God, the world is just completely falling apart. I need to prep for an early morning meeting. There's a pipe that I think is dripping and behind a wall. It's probably rotting the whole freaking house, and my dogs won't start barking, and I'm pretty sure they have fleas and we've given them like so much flea medication and I'm covered in bites and oh my God, like the world, I like can't even look at it. I can't even like, can anyone look at it? And my mind felt numb and my body felt numb. And I just was really doubting the whole talk, and I was just like, what am I even going to say? And like, how stupid am I for believing, that language can fix anything at all? And I didn't know what to do. And you'd be surprised how long it took me to realize that I had actually just reread 20 people basically telling me exactly what to do in this situation. You write from your body, you write from your breath, you write from what you feel, even if that feeling is the feeling that you're not feeling anything at all. So I was like, okay, guess I'll do that. This sucks. And I gave it a go, And first I had these big scrambled chunks of frustrated text, what am I doing? So dumb. Oh my God, I should be asleep or doing my laundry or literally like anything else at all. But I kept going. And and then slowly, weirdly, I wasn't even trying. Like the lines started looking more like stanzas, like poems. And here's a really bad snippet of me mocking myself. Look, I'm trying to finish my talk with a rallying cry on the transformative powers of language! Exclamation point. They can probably do anything, really. Words wake the world up like a strobe light in the eye, bring babies back from the dead, catch AOC and Donald kissing their wedding table stretched across the Gaza Strip. Shit, I shouldn't have written that. Okay, like, crappy poems, unfinished poetry-ish like things, congratulations, I'm a teenager again. But actually, I could feel something lighting up. I could feel my brain kind of creaking places that I hadn't felt move for a long time. So I said, okay. And I shuffled over to my bookshelf and forced myself to read a few poems. And, it was boring, boring. But then finally, reading them with breath, one caught me and it caught my breath and it got something going. And then all of a sudden, another line came. If I say that words can slice open my head like a melon, open it like a music box, and peer down this musky cave, inspecting all my deadened parts, the shrunken sinews like dead weeds bristling on my backyard slope and scratching at my ankles. If words could just grab that tangled mass like a root ball and jerk hard until every root snaps free, I don't think I'd even need to see it. Just throw it out and tell me if and I didn't finish it. It was a bad poem. It doesn't matter. Those words, they didn't change the world. I didn't transcend. I did not find ecstatic pleasure. My cognitive reality was not disrupted in a major way. But I did feel like I had loosened myself just a tiny bit, you know, from that stifling, repetitive linguistic world that I've fallen into as part of my work and life routines long before ChatGPT, right? And if there was a neuroscience machine on my head, I'm pretty sure it would say, whoa, girl, damn, looks like Peter Piper put a peck of peppers in your peanut. Anyway, pleasure, perception, transformation. These are some of the powers that language grants us to stand against injustice, to stir ourselves from despair, to speak back to apathy, and to reclaim our agency in a world increasingly shaped by machines. I'll be posting again my talk and my sources, so I'm not just making everything up here. I think that's not upside down. I had to print this backwards. That was crazy. Um, you think it's going to be easier not using slides. But anyway, just such an honor to talk with you all, and thank you so much. And Ian, this is probably really embarrassing, but I'm about to put out a novel on students and AI, and there is an Ian Linkletter statue in that novel because that is my little humble way of paying respect to your work.